Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Oh, Mail's here.
Your outpost for the week is freshly delivered, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing. And with me, as she is every single week, the one and only, the festive Andrea Coffman.
Hello.
Hello.
I had a whole conversation with a girlfriend of mine about Christmas presents because it's that time of year for us now. And I took a picture, and I'll put it on. If I didn't put it on, I'll put it on Instagram after the holidays. Otherwise, it'll ruin it for some people. But I am one of those very neurotic people where I have a table and I lay out all my gifts, and they all had a sticky note with who it was, and they're like sorted by family, so that when I start wrapping, normally when my 3-year-old isn't involved in wrapping, I'll like each person gets a different wrapping or each family gets a different, like I am so incredibly OCD about this, mostly because I have to take presents to all kinds of houses, and I don't like having to like double check 8 times under the Christmas tree whose is whose. So I'm super neurotic about it. But I took a picture this year of the gifts all laid out on the table and the little notes on top, and you can see the names, and yeah. And they're all wrapped and under the tree. Nothing matches because my 3-year-old wanted to pick all the labels and bows. So I have like a tiny package with the most giant bow ever on it. And I have labels that totally don't match, but you know what? Whatever made her happy. So, and she just drew a line of them through the living room because she wanted to put them under the tree but didn't want to stack them on top of each other. It was the best day. So I am ready to rock.
That's great.
Like 2 weeks before Christmas.
Nice. I still need to do all my wrapping, but I have all my shopping done, which is good. And so that's exciting. Yeah, I try to do that early. And we got a holiday surprise. I got a message here on Instagram, Drea, from a listener. Her name's Alora, and she said that, hey, if you are one of the hosts of Owlposts, I would like to sincerely thank you for talking about Harry Potter books every week with Andrea. I found this podcast at the beginning of March, and I've been working my way through the episodes ever since. For the 2020 Wrapped, which I'm sure she's talking about what they have on Spotify, where you can see how what you've been listening to, what's your top. You are actually my top podcast at 101 episodes by the 1st of December. I'm currently at episode 114, book 5, and I'm hoping to catch up before you end the podcast. If this hasn't been planned yet, maybe you could continue the series with The Cursed Child so I can catch up. And then she said, Merry Christmas. So thank you so much for writing us. We really appreciate that. And we're not sure what we're going to do yet, if we'll do The Cursed Child or not. But we're really excited that you found us and that we've been able to be part of your year. Wow, top podcast of the year.
She's listened to 101 episodes of our voice, and she's still kicking.
Man,
there's hope for us all yet.
She's a lucky, lucky person. That's all I can say. So.
But she's still alive, yes.
Yes.
That we haven't talked the sense out of her, yes. Yes.
I'm right there with you. We got an email too, Drea, from Amelia, and she said, Dear Mr. Rushing and Miss Coffman, I wanted to thank you for all of your hard work you do in creating this wonderful Harry Potter podcast. I can tell you put a lot of thought into what you were going to say, and I love the unique conversations in each episode. I have discovered the podcast in the lockdown and binge listened to all of the episodes, and I'm sadly finally caught up. Sadly, because I have to wait till the next week to receive the next episode, or 2 if you skip a week. I love hearing all of your thoughts on my favorite chapters, the ones with romantic moments between Harry and Ginny. I totally ship them. In conclusion, I'm so glad my Niffler found this golden galleon of a podcast, and my reward not being a large slab of Honey Duke's chocolate, that would not be bad either. But having the privilege to listen to you to very kind and thoughtful people over the week. P.S. Owlpost has now become part of my morning routine, and I always sit down to breakfast with your podcast playing and do the dishes to get ready for the day with the voices of Mr. Rushing and Miss Coffman serenading me as I brush my teeth. Love, Amelia.
Oh, I love it. And I love Mr. Rushing and Ms. Coffman.
I know. Now I feel like I'm my
I
dad.
instantly feel old.
Yeah.
I know. It's so sweet. And I mean, I commend the person for being as respectful as they were, but I definitely feel a little old by that one.
It's very sweet. And then we got one more email, and so this
Man,
one's
we're
from...
popular this
I know.
week.
It's so great. Chloe.
I love it.
She said, "Hello, Matthew and Andrea. I found Outpost back in July on Spotify. I started with the 4th book, and now I'm up to date. I'm going back to listen to the other 3 books now. I wasn't allowed to read the Harry Potter books growing up, but I was allowed to watch the movies," she says, shrug. "I didn't get to start reading the books until January of 2019, and I'm a Christian, so when I tell people I love Harry Potter, they think I'm a terrible person, which I don't, so don't worry.
It's not all.
No.
Not all Christians going to think
absolutely.
you're a terrible person.
I know plenty of Christians who don't. We all love Harry Potter. But Harry Potter isn't just about magic. It's about love and friendship and sacrifice, etc. Plus, the whole plot line is the best, which both of you know. I've always liked Harry because he reminds me of Jesus. He has some of the characteristics, how he sacrifices himself for his friends. He loves them. Matt talks about Ron, Harry, and Hermione being like the Trinity and other biblical metaphors. I love listening to you guys because you're giving me more perspective and ideas I've never thought about before, like the way you talk about the characters and what they might be thinking or feeling about a situation. I love that I'm not the only person who thinks Harry Potter in a biblical perspective. I'm not saying Harry is Jesus, laugh out loud, but I don't see that as a bad thing if it makes you think of Jesus more. And I tried to tell my dad about my perspective, but he didn't like it. So thank you for understanding Thank you for understanding the way I think about Harry Potter. I've actually never listened to a podcast before. Owlpost is my first, and I'll be sad when it's over. Much love, Chloe. Chloe, we're so glad that we were your first podcast, and we love that you love listening to us, and absolutely share your opinion about the series, and I can't wait to get to the end where it's pretty blatant. So, but absolutely, it's just so cool, and we're just glad that we've added any part to your life. So thank you so much for listening to us, and yeah, there's some other great podcasts out there you can check out that I do and that Drea has been a part of as well. If you like what we've talked about here, Harry Potter-wise, you should check out 602 Club, where we talked about all the Harry Potter movies, and Drea was on most of those episodes, as well as Fantastic Beasts so far, too. So definitely worth checking out. Plus, yeah, I can't believe we were your first podcast, so that's crazy.
That's so exciting, and I appreciate the words, and I always appreciate when someone, has their convictions and wants to stick to them and wants to share them even when others don't agree or feel the same way. So, stay true to yourself and what you believe and how you're interpreting everything too. And it's nice, it's nice to be open. I think Matt and I talk about this a lot. It's nice to be open to other opinions. It's nice to talk about them and share them in ways that are respectful and can, you don't necessarily need the other person to end up agreeing with you. You just need to feel heard. So, we're really glad we can provide that perspective and continue. Yeah. Hopefully you can continue doing that yourself too, Chloe. So
absolutely. And, that's the fun thing. Drea and I don't always agree either, as you know, from listening to the podcast. So that's what makes it fun, though, because sometimes we can even make each other think of things we didn't think of before. So, and that's what makes podcasts fun. So if you would like to find us, we're all over the place. You can get us wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed, so you get the podcast as soon as it drops. And of course, you can also find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and if you give us a star rating review, we read those out on the show as well. And of course, if you want to send us an email, you can do that over at thenerdparty.com/contact. You can find us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party. We're on Instagram at The Nerd Party, and of course, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party. So many different places you can catch up with us. But without further ado, Drea, we are at Chapter 25, Shell Cottage, and I was just really struck by how this chapter begins, because Harry is trying to spend as much time as he can, actually, away from people, because the cottage is so crowded right now, and much of the time he does what I would be doing, which is, sitting out and watching the surf come in, just trying to clear his mind. But he's having a hard time doing that because he isn't quite sure if he's made the right decision about the Deathly Hallows versus the Horcrux. And every time he tries to make the argument for himself, he finds himself lacking, even having a hard time remembering why he didn't. And so I love this because it's so realistic onto how, we make massive decisions in our life. And then, of course, we second guess them. And no bigger decision in Harry's life than the one that he just made last chapter.
Yeah, I think we all second guess ourselves. I have personally been in that boat many times and am exactly like Harry in that I start to question everything and feel like my arguments don't hold as much water anymore. But there's definitely something to trusting your gut. And I think, it's important for Harry to remember that here too. And I think he gets there. I think this is that lesson that don't beat a dead horse. Don't keep reliving the same things over and over again. Focus on your next steps and not the ones that you did. The ones that you're beating yourself up about. Think about those just a little bit, enough to learn. But in this case, I don't necessarily know if Harry's wrong. I just think Harry needs to give Harry a little bit of grace and permission to move on past this. And they talk a little bit about it with, Hermione and Ron. And I find it really interesting that Hermione's perspective is to instantly, now that she's had to, and this is how Rowling puts it, once she's had to accept the fact that the death stick or the Elder Wand is a real thing, she's instantly equated it as evil. Because there's no way something like that can be good.
Well, and it's the hard thing is Harry, that's what's adding to his frustration is Hermione agreeing with him and Ron not agreeing with him. It feels weird to him. So he's because he's
normally the opposite.
Exactly. So he's really in a place where he doesn't know what to do. And then the other thing that they've been arguing about is whether or not Dumbledore's still alive, because Harry truly does believe that somehow Dumbledore has, used this piece of the mirror, and he's the one, of course, that sent Dobby, and has been helping them all along the way. And Ron's even how could it not be him? I mean, we've got the silver doe and the sword and the eye and the mirror, and Harry doesn't know how to explain it, and he doesn't really spend a ton of time in this argument, but he does make it pretty clear to them Dumbledore would never be a ghost. If he knew anything about Dumbledore, he knew that he would just go on. And before they can kind of continue that conversation, which would be fascinating to see them get into, they're interrupted by Fleur, who is telling them that Griphook would like to talk to them because he's reached a decision.
Right. She's very much so an intermediary in this chapter, and she even kind of calls that out later that, Fleur is very not pleased with her role.
Yes.
In this whole this dynamic. She is not pleased with being the go-between, which I can appreciate. My role at work right now kind of feels that way, and I don't appreciate it either. But yeah, I mean, they end up in this situation and they're talking to Griphook, and he kind of lays out an ultimatum on the table. That becomes even more sort of impactful near the end of this chapter. And he tells them that he'll do it. He'll help them break into Gringotts, but that he wants the sword as payment.
Yeah, and this is really interesting too, because obviously they need the sword. And we kind of
can't explain that to him. Right? They can't tell Griphook why they still need the sword. But they still need the sword.
Well, and, they're kind of trying to think of ways that they can, pay him with other things. And, you could have something from the Lestrange's vault. And he's like, I'm not a thief, And so they have this conversation with themselves. They excuse themselves. And, they talk about, how they should handle this. And we kind of get into some of the issues that surround the relationships between goblins and wizards and how bad that's been in the past. And obviously it's created wars. And just suffice it to say that neither side is a bunch of angels here. They're all guilty. And so they decide with this idea of, and Harry comes up with this plan, we will give him the sword, and we will tell him we're going to give him the sword. We're just not going to tell him when we're going to give him the sword, because they have to have it. And it's a hard thing for Harry to do but he can't think of any other way around this. And for him, it also bothers him because he keeps thinking about what the scrawlings he saw in Nuremberg for the greater good, yet he still can't think of another plan. And so they tell Griphook that, that he can have the sword, and then they begin planning together for weeks on how they're going to break into the Lestrange's vault.
It's really interesting, the whole dynamic between them. And I think this is one of those instances where I think that how do I explain this? This is one of those instances where Ron's sort of prejudice as a wizard really, really comes to the forefront, right? This is that old school mentality peeking through. And this is like the old school, I like to think of it like the old school mentality that they're faced with. And this is, again, like just another opportunity where it's really, really apparent for Ron. And he's made so much headway, but it's amazing to see how even after 7 or 8 years with these people, with this new exposure, it's so easy to fall back into your old thought process. And I thought that was really important to note, is that even though he has made leaps and bounds of advancement, his first instinct was to swindle the goblin and to lie about it and to feel entitled almost, right? I thought it was so interesting. And I think it's true. And sometimes it's hard. It's just old habits die so hard, and it's so hard to break your old philosophy and your old approach. And I thought it was so interesting that she sort of very lightly highlights that here in this section as well.
Well, and it's so interesting too, because another thing that she does highlight is that as they're spending all this time with Griphook, Harry is realizing he doesn't really like Griphook. Griphook seems to be somebody who is kind of bloodthirsty, who kind of laughs at the idea that wizards might get hurt during this. Like, he's not a nice person. And so I think it's fascinating because, like you said, we're talking about the different prejudices we see here. Ron kind of really brings up the ones from the wizarding side, and then we're seeing the same ones, but on the opposite side. And you can tell as to why the relationships between goblins and wizards have been so bad. And so, yeah, this is just really interesting. And I love the moment, too, that Harry has with Fleur. And I love that they talk about, the difficulty that she's had, and she's thankful that, it's okay. Griphook is going to be staying here, but Ollivander's leaving soon and headed for Aunt Muriel's. And so things will get a little bit easier. And Harry apologizes to her, and she's like, Harry, it's fine. You saved my sister's life. I do not forget. And I just love that she always brings that up. And Harry even thinks to himself, well, I mean, I didn't really save her life because, she wasn't really in any danger. But I guess it's better not to bring that up. But, she took that seriously, and the relationship that she had, she feels as though she continually owes Harry something. And I think it's kind of it shows something about her character. We don't spend a lot of time with her in the books, but I think we can see here that Bill made a really wise choice in the choice of wife. Like, she is a standout woman who has fantastic character, and so I think, to me, that was just something, it's a little small thing, but it really stood out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think she gets a lot of crap throughout the books, especially from Mrs. Weasley. And she's sort of made to be a fluff character, if you will. But yeah, to your point, she actually is a very determined, strong, brave, brings her own things to the table. And I think it's important to see those kind of characters too, that they don't have to take the main stage, that she can be grateful and do what she can. Because, while she's really not pleased with her role as this go-between, she also knows that, that's what they need right now, and that's what I'm going to do. And there's something very, almost patriotic about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so she, it's a great chapter to see her continue to grow. And I think that hers and Bill's relationship is special, and we don't really get much of it or enough of it, but I think we get just enough to know that it's real and it's powerful. And to your point, yeah, he totally picked a wife, and not, I think this is that moment where you're like, it's not just because she's a Vila or part Vila.
Yeah. And it's,
like he knew her, he knew of her, he saw something in her, and it's making him a better and making his family better. So I agree.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because as Mr. Ollivander's leaving, you get some conversations that happen with Luna, which are really interesting, where she's talking about how she's
back at it.
Yeah, she's back at it.
She's back to being Luna again.
And it's just
not
really
that she
funny.
ever wasn't, but yeah.
And she talks about how, they have this horn, and, Hermione's like, oh, no, that's not that. It blew up. It was an Horn, and, she's not believing it. And we also hear about what the diadem was, what it's supposed to be, which is a representation of Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem. So that's really interesting and actually something that will play into the rest of the book. So just keep that filed away. And I love, though, that this chapter is kind of interrupted when a really unexpected person shows up at Shell Cottage, and it's Lupin, and he has some great news that really just completely changes the whole household and the feeling in the house.
Yeah, he comes in and has this great news, and I think it's what you need in that moment. It's that seed of hope, right? And it's that positive distraction to everything else going on. And he tells them that Tonks had the baby, and his name is Teddy. And he shares some of his mother's qualities, and that he keeps changing his hair color. And he is so excited. I love how just brazenly proud he is to do that. And I love they call out the fact that his reaction is almost as if Grimmauld Place and his sort of tete-a-tete with Harry never happened. And then he asks Harry a very important question. Actually, he sort of assumes a very important question of Harry.
He kind of thrusts it upon Harry, and Harry doesn't really have a choice about the matter, which is that he will be the godfather, which I think, it's such a beautiful thing. Harry... There's such beauty to this, for Harry, a person who has had no family, and he's had this made family, all of these people have helped make family for him. And it's just really gorgeous to see this play out. And Harry needs this, I think, and in some ways, I think that this does a great job of helping show, like you said, it brings life, right? Like, this is a life-giving event. And this life-giving event, I think, helps us be reminded of all of the things that we are fighting for and what these characters are fighting for. I think that's really cool that she gives us this moment of joy, because there hasn't been a ton of joy recently. And somebody giving birth, having a child... there is just something, there's nothing, I can't think of anything more life-giving, and I've never even had a kid. I mean, you have, but, like, what an affirming moment that, like, life still goes on, right? Like,
yeah.
As crazy as life is, things are still happening like this all over the place.
Well, and I think it's always great when you talk about death, and you talk about loss, and you talk about hopelessness, that, like, I feel like someone's starting anew in the innocence and, fresh, clean slate that they get to start with is always sort of that breath of hope and fresh air that we all kind of need. Mm-hmm. It's the same way when you see someone posting a new baby story in COVID times right now, you both go, oh man, that must have been challenging to be in the hospital during COVID. And you also kind of go, that's so exciting, right? Because for all the loss, it's always nice to have the counterbalance of the things just starting and those just beginning. And I think that it is a good time in the story for it too. It's a good turning point. To show that things are just kind of getting started and there's always hope. So it's a super sweet moment, and I love it. And I love proud Papa Lupin. Yeah. That's what he is in this chapter. And I love that he says he'll bring pictures by. in the next 2 days. And then it sort of takes another kind of dark turn that kind of rains on Harry's parade a little bit. And Bill offers kind of some brotherly advice to Harry, because during all this, we've sort of noticed, just one or two people notice. In this case, I think it's only Harry and Bill who noticed that Griphook has sort of slunk away back to his room without saying anything. Not obviously wanting to celebrate in the wizarding revelry. But, you know, Bill takes him aside for sort of a brother chat, if you will, is how I kind of took it.
Yeah, and I think what's kind of great about this is we get a taste of something that we wouldn't really know a lot about, which is we haven't had anybody who spent a ton of time with goblins. And so this is where Bill really comes into play, and he reminds Harry, like, look, I've spent a lot of time with goblins, and they think about things very differently, especially ownership, than we do. And if you've made any deals with Griphook that has to do with treasure or with anything like that, you need to be very aware of what that is and how they feel about things, which is they feel about things very differently than we do. And they believe that, it is the person who makes something that is the owner of it. So especially if it's goblin made, that belongs to a goblin. That belongs to them, and it's only like you're only leasing it to somebody. And so I think this is a really, I think what's fascinating about this to me is that this is all about the differences in races and how people view things, and she gives us a real interesting taste of how different, goblins are than wizards. And I think that, to me, that's really fascinating. And it makes what they're about to do now a lot more dangerous, because the deal they've made with him, it's a lot dicier than we thought it was going to be,
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those things where, and I think Bill in this case does a really nice job of communicating it as well, because he doesn't really communicate it with bias. He doesn't really communicate it with, like, oh, well, I know it's dumb, but this is it, or, they're wrong and this is what, it is. He's just very factual, and he's trying to very much so to aid without knowing any specifics, and give the advice of like, hey, I don't know what you promised. I don't know if you promised anything, but it's not going to end well for you if you're not careful, right? Kind of heed our advice here. And he kind of comments that, he has, I really love the conversation. I have goblin friends. Well, I have friends that I would refer to, I have goblins that I would refer to as friendly, right? To the extent of like, he's really trying to highlight the tension between these two groups and how it's something you just don't want to mess around with, right? And be very mindful of what you're getting yourself into, because it's dangerous, right? It's not just going to be hurt feelings here. Like this is years and years and years of, this is what, decades, centuries of back and forth. This is Ireland and Great Britain. This is, apartheid in Africa. Like this is not good, right? Like this is two very different groups with very different opinions, who are kind of willing to do whatever it takes.
I think that's a really, it's a good way to put it, and it's one of the things that just makes it so interesting, and it makes this conversation really interesting, especially as we look forward to, what's going to happen next. Their plan is to go do this, to go to the vault, to try and figure out what it is, that has been left there, that is, hopefully a Horcrux, and it's going to be a dangerous mission. And now we have something on the side of this, which is, it's a mess, it just is. So I'm really interested to kind of see where we go with the rest of this, because it's a big deal. So it's going to be fun to kind of see what happens. So
It's already a very dangerous situation they're going to walk into, and now there's kind of an extra element of oh snap happening here.
Yep.
So yeah, it'll be really great to see what happens. And after we storm Gringotts, we'll be opening Christmas presents shortly thereafter.
Yes. Yes. So,
we'll have earned it.
Yes, we will. Well, excited to get there. It's going to be a ton of fun. We're getting so close now to the end. But Drea, if people want to catch up with you and see what you got going on as we look to get all this wrapped up, where can they find you?
Sure, you can find me on Twitter at PCFChick or on Instagram at Andrea Coffman. And it's Coffman. And I think when this episode drops, we'll do a quick Insta story question to find out what you would order from Fred and George's back of Aunt Muriel's Wizarding Weasley's Joke Shop mail order service. What do you need in your COVID days? Because that's a little part we sort of glossed over. But yeah, I'd love to know what you all would want to have from the Joke Shop for your COVID quarantine. What you would use to drive your own Aunt Muriel up the wall. So I think I'll shoot to do that.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Well, you could find me on pretty much any of the platforms under Matt Rushing 02, and then I'm here in the network doing aggressive negotiations with John Mills as we're talking about Star Wars each and every week, which is a ton of fun. And then you can find me over on the TFM network doing a few shows. Like I mentioned, the 602 Club, where we're talking about all of the fandoms we love, and then, of course, doing literary treks over there, which is about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and then The Orb, which is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. But thank you so much for checking your outpost.
Mischief managed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.